Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Cobb with Z Health Performance, and I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and explain this stuff. How we use the Z-Vibe in functional pain relief, rehabilitation, and performance neurology. I have a company called Z Health Performance. We have been around for almost 2 decades. Our primary focus is on using functional neurology concepts in pain relief, rehab, and also in sports performance. And this little tool has been fantastic for us, so I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talk about neurology, maybe from a slightly different perspective, and again, give you some ideas about how we implement the Z-Vibe along with everything else that we do. So to get this done, what I want to do is a little brief neuro introduction. We have hundreds of coursework hours in neurology, but the cool thing is neurology can be kind of be boiled down into some major ideas or major concepts that once you grasp them, allow you to be creative in your application of different therapies and different tools into your work with patients. So I always tell people the nervous system only does 3 major things. It takes an input. Once it receives the input from the external and internal environment, the brain itself then has to process that input, decide what it means, and then eventually create some kind of motor output to enact our will in the world. So input, interpret, decide, and create some kind of motor output. Now with that in mind, again talking about the Z-Vibe, why this is so important is as a neurocentric practitioner, which is how we kind of phrase what we do, we give equal weighting to input, interpretation, integration areas within the brain, and then also the output. So rather than always focusing on, hey, someone's shoulder hurts, or hey, they have some kind of pathology, pathological movement that we're trying to fix, and then focusing on that area, we're much more interested in all the different forms of input, and then also the brain areas that are required to integrate that input, all so that a better motor output can be created. So whenever we think about the inputs particularly, inputs can be broken down into 3 major categories: interoception, exteroception, and proprioception. Now, when you start to look at that, we call it the sensory triad. The basic goals of these different areas are pretty understandable. They're easy to understand. Interoception, monitor and predict autonomic needs. Now, interoception is kind of a growing area of interest, particularly when we look at children with sensory issues, sensory disturbance issues, sensory processing disorder, ADHD, etc. Interoception can be very altered in those people. It can also be altered in an athletic population. And what we're also finding very clearly is that poor interoception is often related to chronic pain states. And I'm going to talk about interoception going forward because that's where this guy comes in. Exteroception is really about efficient movement, motor control as you move through the world. Exteroception is taking in sensation from the outside, so the visual system's important, the vestibular system's important, our tactile input, gustatory, olfactory sensation, all of that actually plays a role in our overall response to our environment. So within our system, we assess the eyes, we assess the vestibular system, the olfactory system, etc. Because again, all receptor input eventually can be important based off what areas of the brain have been compromised. And then finally we have proprioception, which is basically spatial awareness and your ability to sense motion. So another huge part of our training is working on efficient motor control. Now, that's the receptor basics, all right? So if we start to move forward, and again, talking about the Z-Vibe particularly, one of the things that we consider very clearly with a lot of our clients, again, with chronic pain and a wide variety of other dysfunctions that are related to poor interoception, is how do we improve interoceptive accuracy and interoceptive competency. 3 major areas of interest in that particular portion of the brain when we're dealing with it is the insular cortex. If you're not familiar with the insular cortex, I'll show you a picture in just a second. It's really the 5th lobe of the brain in terms of the neocortex, responsible for a whole host of different things, including pain, really pain perception, as well as degree of pain experienced over time. The vestibular association cortices are there. There's a huge amount of emotional processing that goes on in that particular area. So we see dysfunction in the insula present in many different clinical situations. So again, it's one of the areas of primary interest whenever we're dealing with interoceptive problems. And again, we're getting to the Z-Vibe in the mouth and tongue. Hold on. Vagus nerve is another area that's incredibly important. Vagus nerve is the big wandering nerve, cranial nerve 10, that provides you information from basically the gut and the heart, etc. If you're familiar with the homunculus is that weird little picture you've probably seen of the little man in the brain. We have hundreds of bodily representations within the brain. And actually the gut homunculus lives in the insular cortex, and that is primarily fed through the vagus nerve. So again, of huge interest to us. And then finally, unmyelinated free nerve endings. These are found in fascial tissues, primarily throughout the thorax and muscles. So again, whenever we start thinking about a client, a patient in front of us that shows signs of poor interoception, these are the areas of the brain or the nervous system that we're particularly interested in. This is a picture of the insula. I promised you one. As I said, a lot of people call this the fifth lobe of the brain. It is called the insular cortex because it is insulated. You find it underneath the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, and temporal lobe. It's kind of buried in there, and again, incredibly important in a huge number of different aspects of what we do. Now, I put this slide in here. I don't expect you to memorize it right now, but the idea here is to understand that this whole host of things is related to insular function, and as a result, insular dysfunction can precipitate symptoms, again, through a whole host of different bodily areas. So interoceptive awareness, awareness of your heartbeat, basically sensory awareness, awareness of self. Many of the things that we see deficient in different processing disorders, autonomic symptoms, pain symptoms, respiratory disorders, poor motor learning, poor spinal control, or if you want to think of it as core control, core stability, all of that can be demonstrated when people are having insular issues. So as we start to move forward, and again, trying to do this quickly, I want to talk about the Z-Vibe. Whenever I first discovered this tool, again, we've been doing this for about 2 decades, I was absolutely thrilled because one of the things we've looked at for a long period of time now is the influence of mouth and tongue mechanics and sensation on overall brain function. So if you take a look at this, I'm sure this is all stuff that you know, but very clearly when we look at the tongue itself, we have a couple different cranial nerves involved in the motor control aspect, and then we have different sensory nerves involved in taste, and then obviously just general sensation. So cranial nerves 10 and 11, and then we have 10, 5, and 7 as well. We also get a little bit of 9 in there, depending on what part of the tongue we're dealing with. So whenever we look at motor and sensory aspects, one of the cool parts about doing any kind of intraoral work with a patient is our ability to drive a lot of brainstem activation. Now the brainstem in humans has not been given a lot of attention, but it is coming because we're learning more and more that this first brain or old brain structure, including the mesencephalon, pons, medulla, is incredibly important in terms of maintenance of posture, strength, muscle tone, autonomic control. It is an absolutely vital area to have healthy. And when we look at basic rules of the central nervous system, we know that one of the things that areas of neuronal pools need in order to stay healthy is they need lots of activation. So whenever we encounter someone with poor tongue sensation, poor motor control, poor palate sensation, etc., what we are seeing is someone that is getting prolonged underactivation, usually somewhere within the medulla particularly. So that can be a huge deal for us. And so we were always looking for different tools, different ways to create stimulus around the tongue. So as we move forward, a little bit more about the tongue and just kind of what it does centrally within the brain itself. Tongue sensation is incredibly important, as is tongue movement. This is a picture of the somatosensory cortex. So over here we have sensation, over here we have motor, and if you actually look right here, that big red circle is the insular cortex. That's the stuff I was talking about previously. And then if you look at the tongue's location within the motor and sensory cortices, what you'll see is that the tongue is adjacent to the insular cortex. A lot of people think that the insula is also involved in taste sensation, primary gustatory complex is there. So whenever we start to look at this, one powerful way to begin influence interoceptive activity in a patient is to actually influence tongue activity. So whenever we start to look at the different textures available in the Z-Vibe, the vibratory stimulus is a fantastic tool, again, to target specific areas of the brain that may be dysfunctional. Now, these are just some tongue basics. Basic thing that I really want you to understand here is that we use the Z-Vibe for sensation testing, for vibratory stimulus. We also use it as we go forward, I'll talk a little bit more, to help drive more what we call constant neuroplastic activity in the brain. And I'll talk about why that is, give you a couple books to read here at the end. So if we start to look through kind of tongue basics, really important. If you look again at brain areas involved in tongue control, it's really, really quite complex, and it's actually a fantastic tool, again, in order to activate different areas of the brain, brainstem, frontal cortex, etc. So optimal tongue position is really, really important to us. Again, we are a company that looks not just at rehabilitation of chronic neurologic disorders, but also sports performance and everything in between. And more what we're seeing even in the sports world is people are looking at tongue position, jaw position, and its influence on motor activity. So very, very important to us. Connections of the tongue with facial muscles, diaphragm, pelvic floor. This, as is already discussed, this is from one of our courses where we spend a lot of time looking at the tongue. But what I want you to understand is that we know that there are direct correlations in facial muscle activity, as well as diaphragmatic activity and even pelvic floor activity, again, based off activity of the tongue and jaw. So again, we look at connections there. So moving forward, what I want to start to take a look at is a little bit of the brain activation patterns, okay? And again, this is what our company does. We look at all areas of the nervous system: input, activation, integration areas, and then output. So whenever we look at something as simple as swallowing neurologically, these are the 7 areas that are showing up most, whenever we start looking at current research, I'll say most currently in research, these are the 7 areas of the brain that are most active whenever we are looking at swallowing mechanics. Now, most of these are studies that come out of what's called functional MRI, and this allows us to kind of do almost a real-time viewing of brain activity whilst we're having someone do something else. So if you look at the basic activity of swallowing, we have the premotor cortex, the supplementary motor area. I'm going to talk about the SMA a little bit later when we talk about the vibratory component of the Z-vibe, the thalamus, primary sensory motor cortex, insular cortex, cerebellum, and pons. Now, again, the way that we approach things with most of our clients is we don't like to look locally at their problems. We like to look more globally to go, okay, what areas of the brain are in control of this particular function? Are they dysfunctional for some reason? Was there a traumatic brain injury? Was there birth injury? Is this just a collection of long-term disuse patterns? There's a lot of different reasons that these areas may become underactive. So if I have someone that maybe has a pontine problem, if you look at the pons within the brainstem, it contains cranial nerves 5, 6, 7, and 8. So maybe this is a patient presenting with a vestibular dysfunction. They're complaining of vertigo. They have altered vestibulo-ocular reflex. Is it possible that as a part of their therapy, I can include swallowing in order to activate the pons while we're doing something else? That's, again, one of the ways that we start to look at these different kind of things. So, again, how do we use a Z-vibe? In our work, you may find us using the Z-vibe a lot with someone who has vertigo. That may sound strange, but again, thinking about how I can influence, again, pons and medulla, knowing that cranial nerve 8 is in the pons, that is the vestibular cochlear nerve responsible for in part transmission of vestibular input into the brainstem, then hopefully that starts to make a little bit more sense as to one of the ways that we might use this particular tool. All right. Again, I put this on here. If you're interested in it, you can slow down the video or stop it. Take a look at this slide. This is just basically the previous slide explained in writing. But as you start to look through it, again, it's a really, really fascinating concept whenever we look at something, as simple as swallowing and how we can utilize that as a tool to influence different brain areas. All right, now, obviously I have a picture of the Z-vibe here. We use it, as I said, a lot for basic sensation drills. We start off using the different tips to give patients an opportunity to explore the different portions of the mouth. Now, we work a lot, not just with children, but with adults. So even with adults, we found that the different tips can be very, very useful, particularly if they have some kind of long-term disturbance in sensation. So we normally start off with light sensation testing, using different tips, different textures, and then, as I said, we also start to use quite a lot of the vibratory component of the Z-vibe. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but just again, on a pure sensation level, obviously the opportunity to have different textures along with vibration allows us to provide even higher levels of stimulus to the brainstem and to the cortex. So again, really, really powerful little tool. Now, obviously sensation comparison, vibration stuff I was already talking about. Usually once we have people doing well using the Z-vibe, we'll then progress them to maybe more complex task, marble or dice rolling in the mouth, again, assuming safety measures are in place. All right, now, kind of the last thing I want to talk about here, just in order to, again, give you some insight into why I think this is such a valuable tool in our approach using kind of, again, functional neurology concepts. A growing field, if you want to go read about this, is called neuromodulation. And neuromodulation really looks at how do we influence brain activity using different receptor inputs. One of the things that has come out of the research in general is that we can drive greater neuroplastic change in a patient's brain by providing them stimulus that is both novel and challenging at the same time. And in fact, a lot of the work that has been done in very, very crazy levels of neuroplastic rehabilitation uses the tongue particularly as a vehicle to give novel sensory input into the brainstem and the cortex. So the simple vibratory component of the Z-Vibe we have found to be incredibly important whenever we're trying to create neuroplastic change in our clients. So we often will pair the Z-Vibe with other stimuli. And this is one of the things that we talk a lot about in the work that we do. When you look at dysfunctional brains, one of the biggest challenges is an area that has been dysfunctional for a long period of time may not respond to only one form of stimulus. So let's say I have lost sensation in my left hand and you're trying to create stimulus in my right parietal lobe. If this area has been dysfunctional for a really prolonged period, then simply stimulating my left hand may not ever drive plastic change in that right parietal lobe. So I may then have to include some kind of other stimulus. I could give you a visual drill or some kind of other stimulus to be performed at the same time that we're giving you sensation in the hand. And usually the pairing of the correct forms of stimulus actually create greater brain plasticity. And that, to me, is one of the huge values of how we use the Z-Vibe in the work that we do. To give you a little bit of insight into what we do, kind of how we do it, I would recommend these books for you. Our coursework is kind of a compilation of modern pain neuroscience along with sports science, biomechanics, a ton of neurology, all goes into this. And these are the books that I really recommend that you check out. Therapeutic Neuroscience Education, Explain Pain Supercharged. The Brain's Way of Healing by Norman Deutsch is a fantastic book, again, that talks about neuroplasticity. And in fact, his original book as well, which I would recommend that you check out. The first 2 chapters are all about using the tongue to help blind people to see. So he has been writing about this really, really cool idea of neuromodulation using the tongue for a very long time. So again, these are just some different resources I would recommend that you would check out. Now, obviously, like I said, we have a tremendous amount of coursework, hundreds of hours of coursework involved in using neurology, like I said, in a very specific way to create change in clients, again, based off the ideas of neuroplasticity. And ultimately, this whole video was to talk about this tool. I hope that this has given you a little insight into how we use it. Again, if I were to give you basic case studies, we often use this for people with vestibular issues. We use oral stimulation often for people that have different brainstem issues. So if they have a mesencephalon problem, a pons problem, medullary problems, that could be a respiratory issue, pelvic floor dysfunction, someone with chronic headaches. There's a lot of different things that we will actually use this tool for beyond just basic sensory and motor stimulus for the tongue itself. We also have found this in kind of a basic neurologic approach to be really useful in the extremities. Once we clean the tips, etc., we can use this for vibration testing. If we find that, let's say, a client has a scar that needs some level of stimulus applied, we'll often test it with this high hertz vibration. And so again, this is a really great tool for people to use not just on the mouth, but in other areas of the body that need sensory work. So we wind up selling a lot of these to our clients, having them take this home, and maybe they'll be using let's say I've got all these issues in my left arm and a scar here that needs vibratory stimulus. We may have them doing motor control exercises at the same time. They're applying the vibratory stimulus. Again, using that same idea of creating stacked input into different areas of the brain that are really asking for it. So like I said, really great tool. We've used it now for about 4 years. We have about 3,000 trainers around the world. We've seen amazing results with it. I actually use it quite often also with kids, not just for oral issues, but also movement issues. One of the last things I wanted to mention, because I said I was going to talk about it, when we look at the brain, one of the cool studies that came out of a dental school about 5 years ago was what happens whenever we vibrate the teeth, all right? Because the teeth are innervated by trigeminal nerve. When we give vibratory stimulus to the teeth, particularly the front teeth, biting down on the Z-Vibe, that actually activates the supplementary motor area, which is in the frontal lobe. Now, why that's really important for us is the supplementary motor area is highly, highly involved in bilateral midline stability. And so when we see kids that have very poor midline stability, maybe they're overly flexible or they're inflexible, but they lack strength, they lack coordination, they have movement deficits in the arms and legs, because they lack that midline stability, very often we'll find that stacking Z-Vibe stimulus on the teeth to activate the supplementary motor area, along with some vision exercises and some proprioceptive drills, often create a huge burst of input that create long-standing change for them. So I just wanted to mention that and make sure, don't forget to try that. So if you want to learn more about what we do as a company, this is how you can find us, zhealtheducation.com. Like I said, I've been asked so many times about the Z-Vibe and how we use it and what we do with it, and I'm going to shoot a short video to give you some insight. If you have any questions about it, please contact us. You can email us, you can call us. Otherwise, good luck, and thank you so much for making the Z-Vibe. It has made our work tremendously better.